Well, good day, my friends. Your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today we're gonna go take a little stroll down memory lane for me. We're gonna talk about the death of Rowdy Roddy Piper and how when I was a kid I hated this guy because he was always against Hulk Hogan. And I saw They Live, a movie that he did with John Carpenter, and I loved him. And then years later in Hollywood I got to meet Rowdy Roddy Piper and become friends with him at the Comedy Store. And I'm gonna go pick up a friend of mine now, Earl Skakel, who was not only also Rowdy Roddy Piper's friend at the end, but he was co-hosting a podcast with him. We're gonna talk about how we knew Roddy, the guy that you guys didn't see that we knew. And we're gonna go see where he passed away when he was actually supposed to meet Earl that day to do a podcast. Daze with Jordan the Lion, honoring the great Rowdy Roddy Piper. Roddy Tombs begins right now. So here we are, the Hyde Park Apartments. For a lot of people that don't know, Roddy had a long time home up in Oregon. That's where his family and everybody was, but a lot of people also don't know wrestlers don't get health insurance or anything like that. So a lot of the wrestlers do movies, and they do them once a year at least so that they can get health insurance. And I think Roddy told me that was one of the reasons he kept this apartment here, was so he could do movies and podcasts and things like that. So he was living here at the time of his death on the 4th floor. It's actually the day after my birthday, July 31st. Roddy was going to be doing a podcast with my friend Earl. So here's my pal Earl Skakel. Earl, you and I got to meet Roddy. We saw a side of Roddy I don't think most people ever saw, and I would liken it to, maybe this is a crazy thing to say, but he was like a prophet. He talked wisdom when he talked to you. He told you stories of like life, and I think that's why people gravitated to him at the Comedy Store, and we knew him for years.
Yeah, I mean, he would, you know, if you're over 35 and a male, you know who Roddy Piper is, and he would come in the Comedy Store parking lot in his like Richard Gere American Gigolo type Mercedes. And if you know anything about the Comedy Store in the parking lot, nobody gets to park there unless your name is on the wall. They wouldn't even let at Roddy's memorial Judo Gene LaBelle park in the lot. And the funniest thing was the door guy, not knowing who Judo Gene was, and, hey, you got to get out of here, old man. And Judo Gene looks at me and goes, I'm about to break this guy's arm.
Yeah, they were.
Let him park here.
Yeah, Roddy, when Roddy passed, they did have 2 memorials. They had one where they cremated his ashes and had his burial in Portland, but we also had a second one at the Comedy Store because it was really kind of a home away from home.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Simone is the comic who brought Roddy into the Comedy Store, and he was closest with Roddy, and he was so upset he came up to me right before the memorial, said, hey, you got to host it. And if you know me from Jordan's channel from previous videos, I'm not exactly the perfect choice to be a host of a memorial.
Yeah, no kidding. I think the first time that I met Roddy, if it wasn't the first, it was the second time. You know, one thing about Roddy, completely approachable. You saw Roddy, you could absolutely go up to you and he would shock you because you'd say, I'm a huge fan of yours, sir. And he'd stop you and he'd go, what's your name? Where are you from? How old are you? He would want to know all about you, because then in his mind, he would figure out when you saw him as a fan, and then he would connect. You didn't get a 2-minute conversation, usually 10-minute conversation. I remember one day talking to him and you came up and asked him what was worse, something about having a job to Hogan, or Billy and Chuck's wedding or something like that, and he started laughing, and you ended up, you know, through our friendship with him, being the co-host of his podcast at the end.
Yeah. Roddy had seen me at the Comedy Store talking about how mad I was that Sting got fucked over by Triple H, that bastard, and he said, why don't you come on the podcast and talk about it? He said, come tomorrow at 9. Now, as a comic and him as a pro wrestler, I assumed he meant 9 p.m. So I get a call from Roddy's manager about 9:15 a.m. going, where are you? Where the F are you? I'm like, I thought you meant 9 p.m. tonight. He's like, no, get down here right now. So I go down to the podcast studio, and Roddy walks in with 6 Red Bulls. I thought, oh, he's 3 for me, 3 for him. So I crack open one. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I thought one was for me. He's like, no, they're all for me. You got to get your own, bro. And then...
well, I mean, dude, for people that don't know, Roddy had about, I would say, 3 different podcasts. Because in the early days of podcasting, the networks would go out of business. So I know the first one just went out of business. The second one, he ended up having an issue, and I want to go into this because it's not fair, and a lot of people don't know about it. But Roddy had Will Sasso on as a guest, right?
Yep.
And Will did an impression of Steve Austin. And Steve Austin at the time was also on Roddy's network.
Yeah.
And Steve didn't like it. And what Roddy told me was, he said, Steve complained to the network and told him it's him or me.
Yeah.
Either you kick Roddy's show off or I'm leaving. And so because of that, they canceled Roddy's show. And Roddy told me he was mad because he said, not so much that it's the show, but he said, you hurt my family's income, and you could have been a man and came to me about it. So because of that, I think Roddy was worried, as a lot of WWE guys are, that if he says the wrong thing, his Legends contract might be compromised. And so I remember he had said he was going to have you on because you could say the things he couldn't say.
Yeah, he wanted me to be the heel. It was great. I could say anything. Like, you talk about Pat Patterson being a pedophile, allegedly. I could talk about Roddy and his Bad News Allen, interesting paint job he had.
How Honky Tonk Man tried to copyright his name out from under him. He told me that story. But he said he was grandfathered in. They couldn't do it.
Well, that's what... they brought me in because Roddy would lose his place sometimes. He'd be telling a great Sting story, and then halfway in, he'd just be randomly talking about one of the Von Erichs.
Right,
so
right.
His manager was like, hey, Earl, why don't you, just be the sidekick. You can say all the wacky stuff, and when Roddy loses focus, you can, like, kind of get him back center line. So we had a great chemistry.
You said he was starting to lose his place. I noticed the last time that I talked to him, I think the last time I saw him literally was, I went in the main room of the Comedy Store. Nobody was in there except Roddy playing the grand piano. Yeah. He was just playing some haunting melody. And I look across the room and I see Tony Hinchcliffe sitting at a table watching in silence, just kind of admiring this moment. And I started talking to Roddy afterward, and he was doing the same thing. Like, he kind of wasn't making much sense. And then it was like 2 weeks later, he was on Rich Eisen's show.
Fun over there, boys. What was the question?
about Hulk Hogan.
I'm with you.
Sure.
I'm with you, yeah.
And I watched that live, and I remember going, this isn't good. Like, I almost was afraid he was having a stroke because he was getting so confused.
Nah, but what I don't think is on honor. Let me try to do this. I'm a dad. Okay, I'm a big-time dad. My son's my best friend. To hurt anybody's feelings, if you've ever had your feelings hurt really bad, you'd rather have someone punch you.
And it was just, I think a week later that he ended up passing away here in room 413, and you actually were supposed to meet him that day, right?
Supposed to. Here was the plan now. I know that MMA fighter Chael Sonnen put out this bullshit story that they were going to start doing a podcast. I'm here to tell you the real story. Roddy was just going to start coming over to my house doing Inappropriate Earl. We probably weren't going to call it Inappropriate Earl. I don't know, Earl.
Roddy wasn't doing the podcast for the money. I know that.
Well, I think if you travel a lot.
Yeah.
The great thing about, Roddy's episodes got like 50,000 downloads. You can make some money on that. So it just provided him a way of not having to go to Florida for some wacky wrestling con thing, which he loved doing. But, at his age, he was kind of tired of the traveling, and doing the podcast from LA gave him the opportunity to stay home and maybe not make quite as much as he would have if he went to a Comic-Con in Jacksonville or whatever, but it beats the traveling and the wear and tear on your body. And he was just going to start doing my podcast till we found another home. Yeah. Because after Podcast 1 got rid of us, we went to Earwolf, which is now out of business, and we got kicked off of that network. So I was like, hey man, I'm not on a network, Roddy, I'm rogue.
Yeah, you can get away with it.
So we can say anything you want on my network, because I got busted and shadow banned on iTunes. I need some numbers, baby.
Well, you called it. How did you find out? Like, didn't you send a text and then somebody responded to your text? That's how you found out that Roddy had passed?
Yeah, I called him, said, hey man, I got you. I forgot what water he liked. I think it was Fiji. I'm like, hey, I just went to the sex store and got you water. No, there's a sex store right at the end of my street that has water and shit. And no word. And then his assistant Raymond, who was my go-between when I needed to speak with Roddy, he called me and said he's gone. And I'm like, oh, where'd he go? I really thought that he meant, I don't know, he had to go to a wrestling convention or whatever. And he's like, no, he's gone.
Oh, man.
And I cried shit for about a couple hours, just nonstop.
61 years old, man. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember Ric Flair's quote was, people told Roddy and I that we overstayed our welcome 40 years ago, so every day past that was a blessing.
Yeah.
And he was a family man. I mean, that's the one thing. When you met Roddy, he told you how much he loved his family, how important everything that he did was for his family. So
did everything for Cole, and Teal, his daughter, and then his wife, and you know, he was an old 61. Like when you train with Stu Hart at 15, you ain't doing phony wrestling maneuvers. You're wrestling, basically,
yeah,
for real.
He still was training with Judo Gene LaBelle up until his death. I remember he would tell me, he's like, oh, I had a nice training session with Gene. They would, over at the karate studio in Burbank or whatever, he would do
Glendale, I think that's
or Glendale,
where,
yeah.
Ronda Rousey trained.
Yep, exactly.
Well, I used to work out with him at 24 Hour Fitness, which is now gone, but on Santa Monica and La Cienega, if you guys want to Google it or whatever. And I remember one time he was stretching, and I came up from behind him. I gave him like a little shot to the ribs, like something like that. And he instantly turned around, grabbed my arm, and put me in an arm bar.
I don't doubt it, dude. You don't mess with him.
But I'm not saying he was out of it, but he didn't realize it was me.
Yeah.
Like he was in the zone. He was just like...
Oh, dude, I have a great story. I'm going to try and clean it up a little bit, but you know we have a friend, Jason Tebow, that loves to pick up people's cell phones if they leave them laying around. And yeah, and what he used to do was he would go on Twitter and he would write that the person liked African-American sex organs. And Roddy left his phone laying there one day, and Jason Tebow found the phone, opened it up, saw whose phone it was, and then decided not to do it and went up to Roddy right in front of me and said, hey Roddy, I just saved you. You left your phone. He goes, what do you mean you saved me? He told him what he was going to do, and he said, no, you saved yourself, because I have kids that follow my Twitter.
100%.
You would have really made a problem for yourself. He wasn't joking about that. So
yeah, he definitely had a button that if you were going to do something like that, or maybe say something inappropriate about a family,
he'd go back into, you know, kayfabe almost. Like,
I don't even know if it was kayfabe. He'd go into, I'm going to kick your ass.
Yeah.
But the sweetest guy, like.
He really was. He would do anything for you, honestly. He was, I remember how several comics told me when I told them my Roddy experience, they go, oh man, I was penniless one day working here at the Comedy Store, and he invited me out to dinner and paid for my dinner, and I didn't know where I was going to eat. He goes, and he told me while we were sitting there talking, don't worry kid, something great's around the corner. He goes, 3 days later I got booked for a gig making like $2 grand, and it's like almost like he was prophetic.
He would take, his go-to place was the Denny's on Sunset, Rock and Roll Denny's.
Yeah.
And he tried to take me there once after Earwolf, because Earwolf was right next door to Denny's. I'm like, Roddy, I don't eat where the poors go.
You're insane.
I said,
yeah, I know, because you're doing your wrestling character.
No, but I said it long before MJF did. And he's like, what do you mean? There's no poor people in here. I'm like, Roddy, come on.
God.
I'm Bel Air.
So the cause of death here was he actually passed away in his sleep, and his death certificate says cardiopulmonary arrest caused by hypertension, pulmonary embolism also listed. So it was all heart related. Now what's crazy is that when they had the first memorial, they had it, as I mentioned, where he lived, up in Oregon, and there was some controversy because apparently China, Joni Laurie showed up and wanted to make amends with Triple H and went up and hugged him, and that got out, and then like Triple H's side was saying it didn't happen, and then somebody who wasn't invited filmed it, posted it online, and all of Roddy's children and his wife came out and said that that was heartless and that someone that wasn't even invited should not be posting anything from Roddy's memorial, and they thought it was tasteless and asked for it to be taken down, which it was. But then knowing how much of a family that Roddy had here in Los Angeles with the Comedy Store, then they asked to do a tribute out here. And that's when Steve Simone got involved. He invited me, and Earl also was invited. And then Earl ended up hosting it. And it was kind of an all-star affair. I remember Judo Gene LaBelle, Richard Tyson, Dallas Page, Chavo Guerrero.
Keith David.
Yeah, oh, it was a lot of people, including Roddy's family.
Josh Barnett, UFC heavyweight champ.
Yeah, Josh Barnett, and it was just a nice way of everybody paying homage to Roddy, and for his family, I think it was a side of his life they didn't get to see a whole lot of, so I mean, kind of a cool thing.
Probably the thing I remember the most is the pre-show video. It's like 10 minutes of Roddy's highlights, and I remember they put in a highlight of me and Roddy, picture of me holding up Kamala's book. Kamala Speaks, and I started crying, and then Sophie, my friend, who's the waitress, she started crying, and she didn't really know much about wrestling. So, and then Steve Simone was like, hey dude, I can't host, he was devastated. I mean, I was devastated, but functional.
Yeah, you did a great job.
Well, he's like, you gotta host. I'm like, bro, I don't think that's a good idea. So I remember, all right, I'm gonna go deep on the first zinger, because there's Roddy's whole family in the front. There's Keith David, and he's kind of an intimidating looking guy.
Yeah, from They Live.
And, I'm like, hey guys, it's great to see everyone here. There's DDP, there's Josh Barnett, Judo Gene LaBelle. A couple people wanted to be here tonight, but they couldn't make it. So Hulk Hogan wanted to be here. No, I'm just kidding. He didn't want to be here. Kamala wanted to be here. Actually, he's coming down right now. He's rolling down Sunset. Now, 400 people in the main room. You know when it's crowded in there, the atmosphere it is. Dead silence except for DDP in the back going, oh my God. And then, you know, it was, the rest went, oh, great. I mean, Chavo told a great story about Roddy and Chavo Guerrero.
Yeah.
Like in Tijuana, like with horses, and Keith David. I had to basically force him to get on stage because he was sad. I'm like, bro, please, everyone wants you to talk. And he told a great story about the fight scene. Yeah. And a couple of Roddy's close friends. And
I remember, you know, Roddy, and you even brought it, Roddy had his own soda at the end of his life that Rocket Fizz put out. Yeah. And the guy who owned Rocket Fizz was there, and he told a really touching story, I believe, how he had lost his father or a family member, and then met Roddy right after as a fan, and then said, you know, we got to do a soda for you. And he said he would spend hours a night having deep conversations with Roddy, where they just became such close friends that this guy said Roddy was almost like a father figure to him.
I mean, that guy was a real hustler, the Rocket Fizz soda guy, but, you know, we're all con artists.
Well, you're in the book, right? You're in Roddy Piper's book. You brought a mask that he gifted you, some items, so we'll take a look at them now. So Earl was nice enough to bring out the memorial program that they gave us for the memorial we had for Roddy at the Comedy Store. And everybody that was a speaker also got a kind of an artist backstage pass with Roddy on it, which he has here also. And then they also, which I have at home, I have both of these at home as well, they also gave a little ribbon that was like his kilt, and some people wore those as well. Roddy's book.
I was lucky enough to be in it, but my dog and I, Roddy and Lois,
right there,
in the bubblegum soda, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, I had the Gene Simmons.
And there's Steve Simone, since he kind of made it all happen for the Comedy Store and Roddy. And then he gave Earl this They Live mask, and
to Earl, you rock,
Roddy Piper. Those are really really sought after too. That's a really cool piece of memorabilia, because he used to sell those. You could buy his own merch right from him, and he would sign it and everything.
Podcast One offices, he was like signing 50 of them, and he's like, Earl, do you want one? I'm like, what's the price? So that this will, if my house was on fire, this is what I grab first. I was interviewed in the book because they wanted my take on why you know the business.
Podcast companies come and go constantly. Same with podcasters.
You don't see a successful podcast just disappear like Rodys did. It's like if your channel, it's like 400,000 subscribers, just the next day was gone. You'd be like, okay, something happened.
Yeah.
Jordan pissed someone off. YouTube.
People just didn't know that it was the Stone Cold Story, who you then took to Twitter and were commenting, and he blocked you.
Well, I think Hulk Hogan blocked me too. Like OJ didn't block me, but Stone Cold and Hulk Hogan have. I think the problem was there was an interview I gave. I think it was in the book that I'm like, bro, it was an impression by Will Sasso. Your gimmick was crashing a beer can on your forehead. Get a sense of humor.
Yeah,
that's all I said. And he just blocked me, and I could understand Stone Cold being upset if Will Sasso did something about the domestic situation.
Right, his accusation, yeah.
He literally talked about Stone Cold and his dog Hershey, the Wonder Dog, or I think it was Hershey, and it was a harmless impression. Now, that was done right before I got onto the podcast, so I kind of walked into it, and, I don't have direct firsthand knowledge, but I was told through several people at Podcast One, Stone Cold's given an ultimatum. It's him or Roddy.
Yeah. Roddy told me one night, I said, you think you'll ever do another match? And I think he was 59 at the time. He said, I have an idea. He said, this is what I'd like to do. He said, I've even called Vince about it, but he won't give me an answer, which tells me he's not going to do it. But he said, I want one last match against Hogan because he's never cleanly pinned me. He goes, he's never cleanly beat me. He said, so what I want, I know Vince will never let us at our age have a one-on-one match, but I want a tag team match. I want me and CM Punk against Hulk Hogan and John Cena. That was what he told me. And one of my favorite conversations with him was, I knew that he had a real problem with Mr. T, because Mr. T, when he came into wrestling, didn't really give it the respect that it deserved. And I remember after the Hall of Fame weekend where Mr. T got inducted, I saw Roddy and he said, you know what? I made up with Mr. T this weekend. I said, really? What caused that? And he said, he's a dad. I saw his son. I went over to his son and I said, is your dad a good dad? And he said, my dad's the best dad. And I said, you know what? Holding on to this animosity's stupid. We're just two dads in the end of this. And he said, I went up and shook his hand and hugged him and said, your son tells me you're a great father, so you're okay in my book. And so at the end, he didn't have any animosity. And he even told me, I asked him if he hated Hogan. He goes, are you kidding? He said, we talk on the phone all the time. We talk a lot about the Bible, actually. So that's a side of Roddy Piper you guys don't really get to see.
The one other thing that really struck me was, like a lot of people didn't like the Ultimate Warrior. You talk about being a rogue, wild card. Roddy loved him. He would always say, he'd call him Jim. Roddy never said a bad word about most of the wrestlers that aren't well liked. Like CM Punk is not, in general, well liked by the boys. Roddy loved him.
It was the very first time I met Roddy, and I went up to him and I said, sir, I've wanted to meet you my whole life. First thing he did, shook my hand, took his jacket off, put it on me, and then said, there you go. That's been in multiple WrestleManias. Now you're wearing a piece of history. And he said, and that is made out of Kevlar because I've been shot and stabbed at.
Oh, the shoulder area.
Yeah.
Like
But he would just take his jacket off. That was like his prized possession. If you saw that was his, and he would let fans wear it on first meeting. That's how nice the guy was.
Well, how we originally, because we didn't really talk about this, how I kind of first interacted with Piper was Simone would bring him on stage, and I love Roddy. He wasn't necessarily the funniest comic.
Yeah, he was a storyteller, basically.
Right. But he would kind of get nervous on stage because comedy's no joke. You're up there by yourself. You don't have a Hogan to play off of, or and especially late night at that point of the story.
In that room, the original room is the worst, hardest room in the country.
I've seen every big name comic you can imagine bomb there. So You can imagine before the renaissance of Rogan coming back and whatnot, the original room late night, here's a guy who's wrestling in front of 100,000 people, and you can tell he was more nervous up there on that stage in front of 20 of us. So what we would do is usually me, we'd yell out a wacky question like, hey, Johnny Stansfield from the Stamford, Connecticut Times, who took a bigger doo-doo, Kamala or Mark Henry? And he would go into a Mark Henry story. Or I think probably my best question ever was, excuse me, Johnny Hot Rocks from the Venezuelan Gazette. Was Abdullah the Butcher really from the Sudan? And he went into this amazing, I remember Abdullah, we had a tag match. It was me and Abdullah, Abby he would call him, against the Road Warriors, and it's me and the Road Warriors in the ring and no Abdullah. And we all were like whispering, hey, where is he, where is he? And Roddy was like, oh, I know where he is. Let's make this a street fight and go into the parking lot. So they go into the parking lot, the camera's following them. They open up the door of the van, and Abdullah's eating like 3 dozen Krispy Kreme donuts. They incorporated it into the match. So that's how we started, just yelling out the wackiest questions we could think of.
That seemed to be how everybody got in his good graces, is like the crazier question you could hit him with. He had a great laugh, and he loved to laugh. So I think he enjoyed the Comedy Store because he wasn't always the center of attention. He could blend in with a group of guys that were all fighting to be the center of attention, I feel like. So
I mean, probably it's a top 5 comedy moment for me is one time I'm on stage and I have this speech by Ric Flair memorized. It's about a 2-minute speech where he's in a cocaine-fueled frenzy of going, Herschel Walker.
Allegedly.
For all you black folk out there, Dale Murphy, he's a real big dude, but he's not the champ. Ric Flair's the champ. And I have this memorized to the inch. And one day Roddy asked me, hey, I got the Sarge with me, Sergeant Slaughter. He wants to see you do that Ric Flair speech. And so I do the speech, and Sergeant Slaughter and Roddy are going like this to me. And, you know, not that I've achieved that much in comedy, but what I have achieved pales compared to seeing Sergeant Slaughter and Roddy Piper going like this.
Thanks, Earl. Oh, he left you one last message.
Left me the night before. You'll hear it in a second.
No, fucking clue, me. Well, I'll work on it. And I'll tell you on your podcast tomorrow. You'd be so kind as to throw some digits in a text form my way of where I'm supposed to be at 2 tomorrow, Wednesday, p.m. I would be honored to be there. The rest of it, I can't fucking help you, because I don't know what you need. You're a sick man.
Just basically saying, hey, I'll see you tomorrow. And, you know, of course, he passed away, I think, a few hours probably after he left that message. And, you know, we all think about him a lot. He got his name on the wall. I mean, to prove his stature in the comedy world, as Jordan knows, no non-comic gets their name on the Comedy Store marquee. No matter how famous you are, no matter what kind of an actor you are, you die. It's like, okay, great. Roddy got his name on the marquee when he passed. And not just for the memorial, but after the memorial. And he got his name on the wall at the store. I think he might be the only non-comic to get his name on the wall at the Comedy Store. It's like me getting my name on the Stanley Cup. It's just like, it's unheard of.
I wanted to include this because Roddy used to always say it. He said it was his favorite Irish saying, and every podcast I ever watched him, he always ended it with this. He said, may those who love us, and for those who don't love us, may God turn their hearts. And if he doesn't turn their hearts, may he turn their ankles, so we will know them by their limping. All right, my friends, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Obviously, we can't go into Roddy's apartment, but it was in there, apartment 413, and I hope you enjoyed the stories that you wouldn't hear anywhere else. Thank you all for watching, and Roddy, we love you. We miss you. Have a great night, everyone, and goodbye.
Say hello to Kamala.